G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video about sort of a question we get asked a little bit, but more to the point something that I can see this may be able to help some people. And that is, as the title says, about ELR, or getting into ELR, setting yourself up for ELR, extreme long range shooting. Now there's a few details to go through, so it's going to be a little bit of a long one. I'll try and be as concise as I can be where I can be, but like I said, there's a few details involved. To start off with, ELR, extreme long range. I've been through it before, but ELR is not a distance. It is extreme long range versus that caliber system area, whatever it is, extreme long range for, like I said, for those circumstances. So that can be 500 yards for a 22 long rifle and onwards, and that can be 3,000 yards or even 4,000 yards for some things, is where it turns into ELR from where it was shooting well, and everything in between. Largely you're talking about bullets have gone subsonic. For all those people wondering, it is not where your particular table says that's as far as it can go. No, because it's i.e. 1,800 yards or 1,500 yards for a 7mm Ram mag is still just long range, in my opinion. You start to get out to the over a mile, 2,000 yards is where ELR really starts for the magnum calibers. But listen, really it's all about lots of details. That's not part of the conversation. It's just saying that ELR isn't a specific distance. It is a distance in reference to what you are shooting. The next bit of the conversation would go into the different calibers and bits and pieces and setups and rifle setups and gear you need and that sort of things. Listen, I've done a bit about that. I'll do some in the future, but that isn't what this particular part of the conversation is about. This is actually about finding the area which might depict what you're going to use for ELR. It probably will depict what you're going to use for ELR. You specifically want to do this particular caliber and this particular caliber. It means that you want to shoot these distances to make that ELR to get that experience. Equally, it might be that you have an area that is 2 miles, and so then you want to pick a caliber for that, or you may have only 500 yards and you want to pick a caliber for that. All those details will tend to push you in different directions. Still comes into the same part of the conversation I'm talking about here, and that is actually finding a spot to do this. Now, I suppose I'd also start the conversation and say we're very lucky. We made decisions early on in our lives that meant that we live out in the country, out in the rural area, where there's a lot more, it's a lot easier for us to find that sort of stuff. But we also worked in the part of as a mechanic and with farmers and in a community to where we got to know people, which made things a lot easier for us. Not easy, just a lot easier for us to do what we did. But a lot of these things applied for us. Obviously a lot harder when it comes to where you don't have those relationships. And I suppose then that's probably where I would start. You need to, if you are looking in rural areas versus desert areas or versus public land, you obviously need to find out what your legal implications with and situations are with public land and what that can be used for or can't be used, that sort of stuff. You don't want to end up in a set of handcuffs or with confiscated firearms or that sort of stuff if you've done the wrong thing, so you should investigate that side of things. Not all the same in any particular part of the world, so always investigate what that is, whether it's national parks or that's just public land or that's council land or whatever it is. Investigate what's involved with that. Different rules everywhere. When it comes to private land, in any form of private land, then you once again need to find out what, if there is any illegal stuff. Largely private land is governed by the private properties owners, and they need to work out what's involved with that. You know, if you've got great big paddocks which look really good but there's livestock all over them, then it's probably a no-brainer that's not going to be something that is able to be done. But with speaking to property owners, farmers, that sort of stuff, speaking to local areas, whether it's local hunting groups or the actual property owners or that sort of stuff, you'll get the gist of what's going on there and make sense of whether that's conceivable. So that's the first step of things. I suppose I'd say for people who want to just go and ask a farmer if you can shoot on their property, I would ask you to think from their perspective. They've got a complete stranger who's coming up, hopefully not with firearms on them, but who is just coming up and asking, and what's the chances of them saying yes? And I would suggest off the bat, very low. They don't know you from bar of soap. So obviously, if you're coming from urban areas out to rural areas, or you're moving to different parts than you're normally in, then you don't have much choice. You're going to have to sort of cold call, as it were. But think about it a bit. Come up with a bit of resume. Come up where you've got certificates from your range where you do long range shooting. Come up where you've got another farmer you shoot on and get him to write something down. Get a little resume, essentially, that shows that you are competent and capable at what you're doing, and something that he can check up and do that side of thing if he wants to. Not all are going to. Some will be occasional laid back, and some are going to be stony-faced and not interested in the situation because they don't know you. They don't know who you are. So if you can give them a way of getting to know you and showing that you are competent at what you're doing, obviously the way you present yourself, all that sort of stuff, is very much a relevant feature to this. Come up with your wearing thongs and your shirt untucked and scruffy faced and with a rifle over your shoulder asking if you can shoot in his property. Yeah, no, it's not going to work. So I think you get where I'm going with that sort of things. Check that stuff out. So let's say you've gone through that process, you know this area is likely to work. What's the next steps? And really this is moving into what is more relevant to what they're doing, and certainly stuff I had to do. I drove around looking. I was looking for pieces of land that are going to make sense of what I could shoot, what I wanted to do. Now this obviously depends on your environment. And if you're looking at desert country or very flat country, then that might sound great. It's generally pretty hard if you want to go out to any real distance, because to shoot over flat land is very, very hard to do. You're really after more of a valley type thing, so you're shooting into a hill or from a hill to a bit of a gradient type thing. But you want to be able to, where you can see where your impacts are landing and really having a bit of an angle on that target area, whether you're shooting down into a little bit of a hill or you're shooting up into the side of a hill, is where you can actually see where you've gone and get to see things. It's also where by going over a bit of a valley, it doesn't need to be huge, but going a bit of valley, then you're getting up in the air a little bit, so mirage will be less of an issue. I'll get more into mirage later on, but you're basically looking for conditions. Also the dirt, the type of dirt you're looking into. Might be all great because it's clear and it's just bush and that sort of stuff. It's just forest or whatever it is. If there's no big clear patches and it's all, even if it's only 6 inches high scrubby stuff, that's very hard to do any extreme long range shooting in any form. Whether it's a 22 and that sort of stuff, or it's to be truthful, a 50 BMG will still go missing when it's into stuff where you can't see the dirt. So you're looking for those conditions. If you're looking for the right sort of area and that side of things, and I suppose the next bit that I go through, and there's a few steps and there isn't really a step-by-step process, is all sort of happening at the same time. You find a piece of ground that looks good. You have the ability to be able to shoot on it legally and personally. You have permission or you don't need it, whatever that type of thing is ready to go. Before you get too many further steps into it, the way I did things was I went out and looked around, didn't even take a firearm with me, went out, just looked around, found places that looked okay, and then I came back in actually after I'd found some places, made some mental notes. You could obviously make notes or take a GPS point and dot them down with you. But I came back and what I used was Google Earth. I looked at Google Earth, and because I was looking, when I was first doing this, I was looking for something to shoot in the, I think, I've forgotten if it was 1 mile or if it was 2,000. It's a long time ago, over 10 years ago. That I first started looking for ELR stuff in this area, and I came back and looked to see what was beyond what I could see. I found some spots that looked okay. At that stage, I was just looking from the borders, from the boundaries, and that sort of stuff to see if it was worth asking the local farmers, cockies we call them over here, but the local farmers, to see if we could use the property. Before I asked that question, I wanted to see what the lay of the land was on Google Earth, but what I wanted to see was my backdrop. I wanted to see if just behind those trees that I could see on the horizon type thing, or I could see over the next sort of hill, that there wasn't a house or a shed or a road or infrastructure that potentially people could be around. Obviously keep in mind, and this is another bit we'll get into, people could be around all the time anyway, but I want to make sure I'm not shooting towards any area where they're likely to be around. So that certainly is a no-go in a lot of areas. It looks really good, but just behind the hill, at the top of your hill, there's a house or a property or a shed on the other side of that hill. It's a no-go if it's just behind my target. If everything else is pretty good, it's not behind, but it's over to the side and it's far enough back, but it's on the edge of things, then I've got to start to do some more research to find out what that actually is. That's just a hay shed, people aren't there at all. It's a good 1,000 metres or 1,000 yards over to the right-hand side and 2,000 yards behind, so it's almost impossible to be to that place. I still got to work out if it's something that's frequented regularly, and that starts to get into the permission and the property owner as to what's going on there. Obviously, you're never shooting across a road, and that also means that if a road is only a short distance behind you, that's not, or behind your target, that doesn't work either, because your follow through will be sometimes almost as long as your shot. Rare, they're normally going to be shorter than that, but that's what you have to allow for. And really you should be allowing for as twice as long as your shot done properly, but then there's a little bit of logic involved with that. If you've got a nice steep hill you're shooting into, a good bank of trees you're shooting into, you've largely got that covered, but you always have to keep common sense in this place. Well, and I'd probably say beyond common sense. And I suppose the bit I should go into here a little bit right this way, just a little segue. In proper ranges and things like that, very rare to be set up in the ELR world, very hard to get permission to use them unless you're not part of that club, all that sort of stuff. So it is conceivable, but largely the ELR stuff is done in a mate's farm or out in the desert or in area that has been organised to do in a local, not so much a legislated or a club sense. And that means that to do that, and especially when you're shooting extreme long range in the bigger stuff, that there is a lot of potential risk. So that means that you have things covered as thoroughly as you can. And I'm not talking about employing a 1,000-man ground crew to go out and stop things behind you, but that means in all the logical senses, you've made sure there's no roads, there's no easy access, there's nothing that can actually get into that area, so you're not in risk. But one of the big details beyond that point is that you are constantly paying attention. That means that, as you'll see in the way we do things, especially with my little spotter, that's one of the constant jobs she's doing. We obviously have a field of view that we're paying a lot of attention to, but we're also constantly paying attention to anything that's close. But it is something that you have to be vigilant about. You have to constantly pay attention to. You don't want someone wandering into your shot because you're shooting into a national park and you're shooting out at 2 miles and you haven't really made sense of your clearing. People could still walk out of a track into where your target area is. That's not going to be acceptable. And obviously we don't want something to happen, but in that situation, we're the responsible people. So it means that it's not just for Joe Blow to go and do as much as he can and not worry about it'll be right. No, we're the responsible people. There is no governing body that is looking after a casual shoot or where you're just out with mates, but there still is all the legal implications and all the moral implications that come with what you do in the way of doing the right thing. So I'll stop preaching, I'll get back onto what we're talking about. But the backdrop side of things is super important. Making sense of where it's super important. But once I've done that, once I've gone, okay, I found this, it looks good. And there's a bit more involved with that, but let's say I found that, it looks good. I've looked on Google Earth, it looks good. Then you're into the world of, if it is private property we're talking about, or like I said, makes sense legally, that's okay. But in private property, then it's time to go and talk, and then it's time to go and do, whether it's the resumes or it's the connections in whatever form, to try and make that go forward. And of course, in my honest experience, that 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be interested. The not too many people are keen on that side of things, so it's something you'd have to be prepared for and ready to move on and go again. Let's say you've got to that point. Let's say you've got to a place where that's all good and you can do all this sort of stuff. This is the process I went through. Now I know a little bit more, and that's what we're getting into. And that is that the actual dirt, the actual light, and time of day, air, all that sort of stuff becomes super relevant. So the next step that I took, and I would be taking in one form or other, is not to set up a full shoot with all the mates and a weekend, camping weekend to go out and do this, which is a lot of people have to do this sort of thing. That big step is something that I put one step in, at least one step in between there. And what that step is a simple reconnaissance mission. Go out, and I suppose I learned to do it in various ways, whether it was just go with that firearm in a very no target setup, but to go and shoot and see if I can see the dirt on the ground. So see if I can see an impact. If I can see an impact and I know basically what's going on, which is a bit involved, it means that you're going to need to know, you need to have ballistic apps, which is really where you sort of started to pick the rifle to shoot the range and all the rest of it, the caliber and that sort of stuff. But you need to know roughly where you're going to get, which can be a big part of this deal. Actually working out how to get the thing out to that sort of distance is a big process. And in general, my footnote I'd go with that is that the step-by-step process is what I'd recommend. So if you're just starting to take up rifles and you want to get into ELR and you think go and shoot it, and even at 2,000 meters, it might seem fairly close on my channel, or even just 1 mile. Let's go to 1 mile. We're just going to be able to do that. You may be very unpleasantly surprised at how hard that can be without enough of the right equipment and knowledge to be able to do that, where you can shoot off 1,000 rounds and not see anything. I'll get into that story in a minute. But you basically need to have that basic stuff so you can go out and shoot and make sure you can see an impact. That may change things dramatically. You may find that the ground you're trying to shoot into doesn't show you anything. You may find the time of day you're doing it with mirage or with the conditions and where the light is, you can't see anything. So you have to work that step out. And I'd say there isn't any rule of thumb. There is the conditions suit what the conditions are. For us, we found that early morning, just as the sun comes up, so our shoots are normally starting before dawn. And just as the sun comes up, we found our nice white target. It gets you very easy to see at extreme long ranges. You can see it even with the naked eye quite easily. Almost looks bigger than what it is because the bright white is shining back the sun. It's also before the air is heated up, the ground air is heated up too much. There is generally a 20-minute patch all times of the year where you get low mirage, good light, tends to be calmer wind, not always, as you see a lot of our videos are very windy. But it's at that stage there for us is when it works. There are also times where evening, for the really extreme stuff, we found the light coming back towards us, hard to see the target, but easier to see the impacts is where it went to. You may have it conditions that the middle of the day works for you. Certainly the type of ground, the type of wind, understanding the wind, that sort of stuff. There's a fair bit of, like I said, reconnaissance to make sense of where this is going to work before you invest a whole weekend camping trip into making this happen with a group of mates to try and do this sort of stuff. It could be very disappointing unless you've done a little bit of that run up to get to that place. And back to that 1,000 round without seeing it. I haven't done 1,000 rounds without seeing it by any means, but I certainly recall one of the a few times down, I think it was the first time we were trying to set up to do a full 2 mile shot. We checked everything out, we'd worked out where we wanted our light and that sort of stuff, but we were starting to, we were shooting a 300 grain with the 300 grain in the lapel Magnum. And we had all our basic maths and bits and pieces, so that was all we knew. We'd already hit at 3,000 yards, and I think we'd enough of the 3,000 meters, or it was 2 miles we were going to. It was out to the edge of the paddock that we had but still good backdrop and forest and things behind us, so still covered on that side of things, into a hill, all that sort of stuff worked out. But the first time we tried to do that, we tried to do, and we failed. I shot 20 rounds, I think it was. I shot 5 and couldn't see anything. Okay, so try something else, and couldn't see anything. And I think it was 20. It might have been 10, might have been 20 rounds. Couldn't see anything. So, okay, what are we doing wrong? What's going wrong? What's going on here? Was another place where we learned, but what we did with that was I packed it up and then went to where we were shooting and walked around till we found impacts. We found why we couldn't see them. There was a place where there was the beginning of learning wind through that area and what was going on, and the wind was different downrange than what it was, and probably up in the air as well. I've forgotten exactly the scenario. What I remember is about 150 yards to the left of where I was shooting, and a little bit further where I thought my impacts were going to land, but not much, about 50 yards further. There was a dry bed of ground moss that was all over the ground, which looked like dirt, but it was actually ground moss, and in there is where the impacts had been striking. From further out to further back to left to right, about sort of a 50-yard spread of where I'd tried different things when I was shooting to try and see an impact. But because it was landing into that stuff there, I couldn't see anything. Couldn't see anything at all. There was just, they'd gone in with no dust. If they'd hit the paddock and the dirt I was aiming at, would have seen the dust. But it was a learning process, which was for us was, okay, we'll see what actually happened. Took us a while to find them. That was an hour of walking around looking for things. But once we found them, then we came back, I think it was the next day or next week, we came back and did it again, and then we started to see, and then we started to do this same process, work out what we needed before we tried to do the shoot. I've also been in the situation where, which I think I've documented as to what we did in trying to shoot the new 375 Gibbs, with a big long bullet, shot so well out to 2,400 yards, shot through the steel and in the first shots with it, shot well out to 3,000 metres. We went out to 4,000, trying to go to 4,000, and we couldn't see anything. We put a lot of effort into trying to do that with all moving things around and shooting in different directions and that sort of stuff. We were getting snookered by the fact that the bullet was losing stability and tumbling out there. It was too long a bullet for what we were doing. Like I said, that's documented as what we did there, but eventually figured it out. The little trick we had to figure out that one there was we had GoPros at target. So we have a shield, we put a GoPro at target. That actually can help when you're really struggling in the really long distance stuff, just listening to where your impacts are, and especially if you record what you were doing, when you were doing it, and then can tie that in. That can be complicated, but it's doable. Then you can make sense out of listening the closer impacts where they were the further impacts. I would say, I would come back and say, it may seem very, 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 very simple when you watch our videos and see what we do. Now, years down the track, we've sorted it out, we've made sense of it, we've made everything work. But when you first hear, it can be so frustrating to the point of you're not sure bullets are coming out the end. They go bang, they sound like they're doing something, but you don't see anything at the other end. And that can be in as close as 1,200 yards. You can have those sorts of fights. It can be really complicated. So it's a step-by-step process to get to that place, certainly starting small and building up. As with everything, getting to that place can make it a lot easier, but these steps should still help. And I'm talking about the setting up with the light and all that sort of stuff. That's exactly the same for stretching out a 22 long rifle. Unless you've got the right conditions, unless you've got the right dirt, unless you've got the right backdrop, unless you've got the right light, all the bits and pieces. It still is incredibly hard unless you've got that. Now, in the right conditions, and if you've just stumbled on them and it works really well, it seems really easy. It's the other conditions where it's not so easy, but all of these things can be involved. So I think that's about the list. In the way of finding it, certainly what we do is a bit of looking around the place to see what's going on, a bit of research on what the protocols are, whether that's government land or private land or whatever. Look at how you present yourself when you're asking people and connecting to them, that sort of things. That might be through clubs, which is a lot easier, but always keep in mind if you're going on someone's property that you are, in my opinion at least, be the best you can be. That is a more acceptable thing to be. It's more likely that they are going to be agreeable to what you want. And And I suppose on that note, I touch into how lucky we are in what we get, in what we do. I suppose a few things I'll go through quickly with us. We are very lucky. We've found a property that's very close to us that uses the largest hill in the area that lets us have that shoot. There's not much of a drop actually because there's sort of a valley all around this hill, but we're normally shooting in the no more than around 3 degrees of drop. But we shoot from a hill into across a valley, so it works really nicely for that. We found largely here we can shoot where we want to. We want to shoot west largely because it's the early morning stuff. Big mirage issues, big wind issues that have in our area. It's flat, dry, dusty Australia, Western Australia, just out of York. So we normally get around a 20-minute shooting spot. So like I said, starting early and doing that. But that also works very well with the fact that we work with, it's a working property. So generally, when we are finished shooting, packed up, generally we'll start to see workers come in, trucks come in, that sort of stuff. It's working, it's operating. We've always let them know what we're doing. We run a range flag on there so people know that we're doing this sort of stuff. We always pay attention of things. We do get surprise attacks of people who just rock up anyway, and we shut things down. That's part of our job, to make sure that we are good 2 miles clear of, so there's no one in our action. And we also, as I said, are very fortunate to have this opportunity, but we also preciously look after it. People ask us, can they come out and shoot with us and that sort of stuff? And no, it's not a conceivable thing through the fact of, well, the logistics of it. 20-minute shoot at 5 a.m, 6 a.m. in the morning, that's all the shooting time there is on the property. It logistically would be nearly impossible, but also through the fact that it's not something we'd even ask of the property. We're very, very, very thankful for the opportunity to do it, but wouldn't want to press our luck. It's that good. I don't want to lose it. So that's the process we go through. And to be honest, if you're setting up with a farmer or setting up with private property, my advice would be to treat it that way. This is something to be very thankful for if they're able to do it, and doing all the right things you can, helping out where you can, that sort of stuff is part of the process of keeping that good. There is other things they have to deal with. So a lot of people know well they're frightened of the sound of firearms, so just the sound can be an issue can cause an issue that you may have to deal with. If you've got all your other ducks in line, it becomes a lot easier dealing with that little issue. Yeah, where was I? So finding your what you need to do that, to get to use the property, do your research, go and look, make sure you understand things, build up in the distances you're trying to shoot, understand the dirt, understand the light, understand the bits and pieces. You may be really lucky and have the middle of the day is really an option. In most of the situations I've seen, the middle of the day it's easy to shoot, it's hard to see. And ELR is as much about seeing as shooting. That touches in the forward observation side of things, the forward spotters, that sort of stuff. Listen, I suppose I would say it's not the way I do it. It's not what I really think shooting's about. But I get it for some of the really long stuff. It's the only process and some of the conditions they're dealing with. That's what they're doing. I'm not going to condone it, but equally, each to their own. I would say if you're even considering it, I'm not a safety first guy, but in that case, I'm in the safety 3 times first. You must not stand just off camera, just out of where, because I know the guy's a good shot, he's not going to hit. You must not ever take that sort of approach to it. You have to allow for it going wrong, and you have to go for it going wrong with 10 times the energy you expect. So yes, it will punch through 3mm steel in the wrong circumstances. Now, what I'm trying to say is, I don't know what it is, and I'm not trying to say it would. I'm trying to say you must consider it that way, because if you don't consider it that way, that accident will cost more than you could ever imagine. The urge to get the shot done, all that sort of stuff is high, but I got to tell you, if it goes wrong, the urge to make that go away, to make that bit of history disappear, to make life be different, will be way stronger than that urge was to start off with. So keep that in mind. Don't underestimate the danger factor involved with that side of things. As said, not something I'd recommend, not something I'd encourage, but each to his own. Yeah, That's what I was talking about. Views, very important, and that's probably the biggest thing we're talking about, and that's best controlled by understanding your conditions and your circumstances. And to everyone out there who's into it and does it, hats off to you guys. For the people wanting to get into it, listen, it's a great thing to do. ELR side of things is a lot of fun, a lot of technical ability, a lot of fun can be had. It takes dedicated effort to do it well. It takes a lot of paying attention to do it well, and I'd have to say, keep that in mind. There's people looking. It's not just a chat session out there. Really, if someone's on the trigger, there's other people should be looking out for other things, so keep in mind with that. But yeah, good on you all. Thanks for checking in on us. And guys, if you like the video, please subscribe, share, like, all those bits and pieces. If you can support us, we do this sort of video, and most of our stuff is to really try and help our community, help it grow all over the world. So if you can support us and help us bring this stuff to everyone, there's lots more to come. So the longer we can do it, the more we can do of it. So if you can, only if you can, then we'd love the support. Anyway, guys, thanks for checking in on us. We'll catch you next time.